In this tutorial, we're going to create a simple responsive Tailwind CSS navbar. So we're going to use Tailwind CSS to make it completely responsive no matter the screen size, as well as add in a drop-down component with a dash of JavaScript to deliver the full experience. So if you're newer to Tailwind CSS and not quite getting the hang of the responsive structure of it, this video is for you. I'm going to use Codepen for this example. I think it's a easy service to use, no setup really, just pretty much one and done. So what I wanted to show you first is just the primitive navbar we have here. Here's the drop down I was talking about. You click it or click off of it, it closes, click on to open it. There's some hover states with Tailwind we can add. It's a basic dark gray kind of background, nothing too flashy by any means, and that's the whole point. I don't want to go too crazy here. But as you transcend down, you can see it starts to become a responsive navigation, and that's all built into Tailwind first, but also in the browser, how it's set up. So at certain viewpoints, the structure of your navigation can change and respond to gracefully, which is the beauty of responsive navigation and responsive design as a nutshell. So when you click this hamburger menu, as we call it in the space, a new menu appears. It's essentially the same menu as before, but it's stacked and a little more congruent with the layout. So that's essentially the guide. I want to walk you through how this all works. When you click this button here, there's some JavaScript going on, as well as when you click off. So we're listening for events based on your click event and doing things based on what's actually on the page in the HTML. So if we want to view the source code, here's the final component, how it will look. It's nothing, like I said, to write home about, but there are some cool things like this little SVG icon for the drop-down arrow, which you could manipulate too if you wanted as additional CSS. I didn't go too crazy, but in the code we'll see some classes that don't come with Tailwind, and those are for specifically responding to JavaScript events, which we'll get into. So in this guide, I'm going to kick it off now. I'm going to basically recreate this, maybe with a different color so we can easily see the differences and go from there. So I'm going to create a new pin, and if you want to follow along, I recommend doing it just so you get the understanding of how responsiveness works, the class names you need to write, etc. Just follow along as I type. Now, the parts of this might be a little mundane from typing so many things, but I promise it's worthwhile if you want to learn. I'm going to kind of repeat myself here, and then we'll say guide, something like that. So first things first, we need a way to integrate Tailwind into our Codepen library here. Now, if we head to Tailwind's CSS documentation, the installation portion, there is an actual CDN you could use, and it's actually loaded as JavaScript. If you look here, it's in a script tag. So I'm actually going to do that inside of our Codepen repo. And what I'll do is go over to the JavaScript pane and then add a CDN here manually of CDN tailwindcss.com. That should go ahead and add that what we need. Now, if you wanted to customize that just for illustrative purposes, for whatever thing you need to do, if you know anything about Tailwind, you can extend the themes that come installed. I'm not going to do that for the sake of the simplicity of this tutorial, but I'm going to go ahead and get this rocking and rolling. So close that tab. With this installed, we should be able to go ahead and add our first bit of CSS. So I'll start with a BG of sky 600, text white, and inside there we can say, maybe just make sure everything's working with some sort of logo, and it loads. Great. So that gives us a starting point. I'll remove that part for now. Inside, I'm going to add a container. Since we want the full width of the navigation to be background color, we want the container component to be inside. The container is going to make sure the content is shifted from the left and right margins, and it's going to evenly distribute it with this MX auto class. And that basically means margin left auto, margin right auto. And so we also want a little bit of padding based on what's inside. So that's what that's doing. Padding X means on the X axis, we're going to add it on the left and on the right. So if you see X or Y ever in a Tailwind CSS class name, that's kind of like an axis on a grid. So think of it in those terms. And then the 4 pertains to just I guess a measurement based on what Tailwind's set up with by default. Now you can add your own classes if you ever need to. but it gets a little hairier or more complicated to do so. For now, we're going to use defaults just so it makes it easy if you're new to Tailwind. So here's where it gets into more of the responsive nature. Now, you're not going to see this instantly with our demo here, but on the responsive setup, you'll see these breakpoint prefixes, and those come with a set of characters with a colon, and then you declare another class. And that's essentially saying at these media breakpoints, we'll do different design with CSS. So if that's new to you, that's what's happening if you see those classes. It's a little hard to wrap your head around based on responsive design, I guess, if you're used to old traditional CSS where you're actually writing that CSS. But in this case, if you want a screen and the minimum width to be 768, for example, we'll do some sort of different variant at that point. So we're thinking mobile first. So think of it going from a phone up to a desktop screen and not the other way down. So if you want to do the other way down, you would want to change these to max width. But by default, these are doing mid width. So if you kind of follow that predefined path that Tailwind sets up, that's probably an easier path to think about. And in this case, we're going to use Flexbox to make this content in the navigation flex from like left to right. So if you recall, in the beginning, we had our logo and then our links. And then on the right, when you transcend down to mobile, you'd see the hamburger menu, and the flex is taking care of that for us. Traditionally, you'd something like CSS floats, and those are a little cumbersome, and Flexbox has brought on a lot more control, as well as CSS grid. And this isn't really a tutorial about those approaches, but it is something to keep in mind when you code, that you have different tools in your arsenal to take matters into your own hands, essentially. So in the case of our main nav, I'm going to add our logo container here next, and it's also going to be a flex container, and we're going to add item center. You'll find yourself, if you're using Flexbox, typing this kind of setup a lot. It's going to be either justify center or justify between, along with flex, and then item center. That's if you use Flexbox. I find myself writing that in my sleep. So in this case, let's go ahead and on mobile screens, or on desktop screens and up, we'll go to with auto, but otherwise we'll have it with full. So on mobile, it will be a full width container. And inside of it, we'll have our anchor link that's going to essentially be our logo. And I'm going to use just my site, webcrunch.com, for the logo. You can use whatever you want here. So there we actually get something presentationally displaying. I won't link to the site just for the sake of not needing to, but we'll do another flex in here, and then item center. If you wanted to add a logo or something, you could do the flex here. I don't think you really need to, though. So let's remove that for now. And I'll do a PY5, PX2, text white, and then flex 1. This will make sure it goes all the way across and inside this container. Flex 1 essentially means it pushes the boundary of its contents across. And a little typo there. This should make that a little bit taller in height. There we go. Great. So that's kind of already looking like a navbar. It's simple, but that's the approach we're taking so far. And you can maybe tweak this to be like a font bold. It gets a little chunkier. Great. Okay, so underneath that, inside of the same div, we want to add what will be our mobile menu icon. And you can add comments here to help you if you want. I added them just for the sake of this guide. So a lot of times I don't like to add comments in my code, just so the end user doesn't really need to see all that stuff if they happen to view source. So on this specific case, on our larger screens, anything bigger than 768, if you recall the medium setup here, we want to actually hide this div, but otherwise we'll flex it much like the other containers. And I'm going to go to heroicons.com and search for, let's see, bars, I think is what I called it, and just copy the SVG from this website. This is by the Tailwind guys as well. And we'll paste that in there. And it has a stroke of current color, and that essentially means the stroke outline of the contents of his SVG will fill with whatever the containing element has as a fill or a text color. So basically, to summarize, if you give this a text color, it will fill to that color. So we'll just say text white for now. Otherwise, it would actually inherit from our text white class up here if you want to go real deep. You don't even need this class per se. And we can verify that if I remove this class for now, and you'll see that icon show up, which is good. Great. So let's add that back, medium hidden. That way we display it on mobile only, because that's really going to matter when you're on your device and you need some sort of button to tap on. It's a little bit easier to move around and do that kind of stuff on mobile. Okay, so underneath this div, which we'll fold, I'm going to fold this so it's a little easier to see. That's the logo container. We'll start a new div, and it's actually going to be hidden class. And we'll be toggling that hidden class with JavaScript coming up. But on medium screens, we want to display it flex. So essentially, on mobile, it will be hidden, but otherwise on desktop or 76 and up, we'll display it flex. We'll also do medium flex row. So flex column will be on mobile, and that's so we get that stacked effect, if you recall. So on desktop, we want our links to appear from like left to right, but on mobile, we want them to appear from top to bottom, and that's essentially what this is accomplishing. We can do, again, item center here. Justify start to get our links at start. And then we can do this space class on the x-axis that basically shifts a degree of the links to have space in between. And then padding bottom 3 on mobile, and then medium screens, we won't have any padding. So anything above 768 again. Then finally, this will have a native class we're going to give called navigation menu, and I'll revisit this coming up in our JavaScript, but we need some way to target it uniquely, and that's what class I ended up giving it. Now, you could use IDs for that as well. A lot of people do that in the JavaScript world just to be a little more explicit. The class, I feel like, could be something that could be repeatable if you have multiple navbars or some reason. So your JavaScript, you want to kind of maybe think about it, making it as reusable as possible. So that said, let's add our links just so this starts to take shape. I'm going to just call this home. Class will be, repeat ourselves here, px3 block about. Great. And I wanted to add a drop-down component to this tutorial as well, because I feel like that's a common pattern, and it's often a little more complicated than meets the eye. So we'll do drop-down menu in this next link, and it's actually going to be contained within another div. I'm going to give it a class of relative because we need to absolutely position the drop-down so it's unique to that specific area and then in the navigation. So in our case, we'll go and add a button. This will be the actual link. And I'm going to give it a type of button so the browser knows exactly what kind of use case it is. A button could also be submit. It could be another kind of action item relative to what you need it for. So keep that in mind. I like to be explicit with its use case. Again, the JavaScript approach, we need to toggle this or target this independently. So I'm going to call dropdown toggle eventually with JavaScript, but for now we just give it that class so we can target it later, and I'll get to that, I promise. px3, so again, on top and bottom we'll have some padding. On the right and left we will have padding as well. Just a unique way to do that. Inside of there we can add I'll add a span tag, and I'll call it services, and we'll do hover bg sky 800 and flex item center. So these elements in the middle flex. I'm going to add an icon as well that's coming up. So, and then we'll do a gap of 2 and then make the corners rounded. So when we hover over this, I want it to appear like so. That's essentially what that's doing. The flex is there for the sake of an icon I want to add. So again, I'm going to go to hero icons and get a chevron icon, which they have a few here. I'm going to just copy the simple one here that's pointing down. Paste that in. Again, it's going to have the current color aspect, and these are stroke based. So some icons are fill based and others are stroke. I prefer stroke lately, personally, just for the design side of the equation, but up to you if you want to use something more bold. And then on the specific span task class, I actually want to add this class called pointer events none. And you'll see, well, you might not see now that I added the class, but essentially when you click on this button, this is another element in the button, and the upcoming JavaScript we have will actually target that button and might not call the drop-down toggling logic we need. So this essentially means you can't actually click on the text here. It doesn't like respond to it directly is what I'm trying to say. And if you want to add, see how I can select the text with my cursor? If you want to add the inability to do that, which I might consider, we can add select none. And now you can't select the text. I can select the one here if I wanted to, but not this one. So that's kind of a nice thing to do, essentially for, in my opinion, buttons. So the button you're clicking on is one use case, one purpose, and it's not getting skewed by some sort of manipulated element in the DOM. And that's really important for the JavaScript, not so much for our responsive design here, but I just wanted to add that so you get the idea. So I'm going to add some classes to make this chevron quite a bit smaller. We're going to make it width and height of 3. And then we'll also add pointer events none to it. Now, if I were to remove this gap, you'll see that it butts up against the text, which is what we don't want. That's why that gap's there. And then the flex, if I removed it, you'll see that the elements display block, which isn't what we want either. So you see real time what's happening there and why those classes exist. So real quick, I'm going to use Codepen's tidy feature. If you click this arrow here, it'll say format. It'll just kind of go through and do that. I like to do that every so often. I don't really agree with how they do it all the time, but it's okay. Okay, so underneath the button, here's where we're going to add our actually drop down menu. So currently there's nothing there that would toggle if we did drop down. So what I'll do again one more time is target this with the unique class drop down menu. And you notice the namings of those, drop-down toggle, drop-down menu, are pretty generic. So it's not like an ID, drop-down menu 1 or menu item, anything like that. And that's on purpose. I want to, typically when I write my JavaScript, I really try as much as possible to reach for something that's reusable, that I can convert into some sort of component. Because often, not crazy often, but often you'll find yourself in this repeatable state of needing a nav on a certain page or some sort of drop-down component in a scenario, and you're reinventing the wheel, writing the code again. So I've found over the time as a developer, I've gotten better to seek that out and understand where things are pretty much going to be reusable if I spot them quick and early. So it's better to code with that in mind if you can. It's not the end of the world, but it is something that saves you time later. So here's some, I'm doing some absolute trait. So that's going to make this positioned, because we have the relative class name on this containing div, we can absolutely position our menu relative to that container div. And then the contents of this can be, moved around with a bit of logic with CSS. So in our case, I'm just going to style this to be, I'm going to make it sky, not gray, and text white again. And then we'll do just the bottom of the container will be rounded bottom large. Give it a bit of padding on the bottom and just set a fixed width for now. On mobile, this isn't perfect, but I think you can get away with it. Okay, so inside there, we'll actually have more links. I'm going to just add those, and we'll see web design. Let's go with 3 links for now. Web design, web development. I just did a command or alt click on my screen for each of these characters or each of these links, I should say, and we could add the same classes across each. So I'll say block px6, py2. I want these to be a little whiter on the padding front. We'll hover over and have a background of sky 800, a little darker. And if we want to test this out, we can remove the hidden class here, and we'll see it in action. There it is. So you see how it's fixated. If I remove this absolute class, you'll see it kind of just shift in line, which isn't what we want. So adding these two back, the hidden class will be toggled with JavaScript very shortly. But for now, we're going to leave that alone. Finally, after this div, let's see, where's our div here? The relative div, which is the one we want. I'm going to fold this here so I can see where the end of that is. And then following that, we'll add one more anchor link just to have one thing past that called contact. And again, we can basically copy and paste these. Let's see how it looks on mobile. So on a mobile view, if you go to your browser and either right click and say inspect or hit Command I, you can do that. I'm in Chrome at the moment. And then if you toggle this device, there's a shortcut for it too. I think it's Shift Command M for me. But here's our menu. Notice it's not displaying because we have that hidden class on right here. It's part of, at least for the icon, but on the menu itself we'll have hidden. If we remove that, you'll see it will display flex column, and that's how that's working out for us there. So add those back for now. I don't want to center the links, but we'll get those more in line here in a second. So let's shift back to this. Now comes the time for the JavaScript, which is the dynamic side of the equation. And there's a few things we want to accomplish here. And the first is trying to be as reusable as possible. So that's what my approach is going to be. But also the second is considering this dropdown, but also our mobile nav menu. So those are two different kinds of dropdowns that we need to code for. And you might do, some sort of built-in tooling, whatever framework you might be on might solve for this, but with traditional vanilla JavaScript, you can do it too. It does take a little more code, a little more keystrokes, but it's not the end of the world. So in our case, I'm going to add a document, add event listener. This is kind of my initial way of writing JavaScript. So when the page is essentially loaded, everything's up in view, we will begin doing our logic. And I'm going to point out that we have a JavaScript toggle in our initial code here, drop-down toggle, I mean. So I'm going to actually look for all of those on the page. And I'm doing that because if I wanted to ever add, say, I don't know, another category section, which is a drop-down too, all I need to do is just copy and paste this code, essentially, and it's done. I won't need to do anything as far as adding more JavaScript, targeting a new selector, all those things. So this is what I wanted to get the reusable part underway. So let's select all dropdowns. Great. And then I will go and say const dropdown toggles equals document dot query selector all, essentially means go find all of those. We'll say dropdown toggle. Now, if you want to make sure this is doing something, you can do console.log, drop down toggles. There's the node list. There we go. There's a button. We only have one, but what if we were to copy this? Let me do that real quick just to show you what I mean. I'll do from this relative statement down, paste it in just before this. We'll have two there, two services. Now there's two. Notice that? Pretty simple. All right, I'm going to undo that. Save this back down. We'll tidy it once more. Great. Okay, that gives us, the initial logic we're after. Let's go. I guess I'll keep this open so we can really debug things as we go. For each of the toggles, we want to listen for a click event, essentially, and that's going to actually toggle that dropdown. So in our case, let's go and say dropdown toggles dot add event listener. Or actually, excuse me, since we have multiple, maybe we'll want to do for each toggle and loop through it. Use parentheses here. I'm using ES6 syntax, so it's a little different than old school vanilla. And technically you don't even need those parentheses. I'm going to just remove them for my own sanity. Inside there, we'll do a toggle to add event listener. And it's going to be a click event specifically. You can use, there's tons of events you can listen for. So we'll pass that through. We won't make use of the event itself, so we don't need to pass it through here as an instance variable. You'll see that a lot. In our case, we just need the anonymous function, and we'll say const dropdown menu equals toggle dot query selector. All right, we could do, I guess we could do next element signaling element. Now, if you're not familiar with JavaScript and this is over your head, don't worry. This is just giving you the groundwork to be laid. Let's log that out and make sure it's acting accordingly. So if I click this, I'm going to clear my console. There's our dropdown. And next element sibling essentially looks in the DOM for the initial event, so our toggle button, and I'll show you that. It's this here. Now the next element sibling essentially will be past the button itself, and then it will be the div component since it's the next element, hence the name. Okay, so then we can check if that exists. If drop-down menu class list contains hidden, we want to do something. And by default, it does contain that. So if you recall, we hid it by default. Oh, that's what's wrong. One too many parentheses. So we'll do that. If it's containing hidden, we will hide all the other menus. So we'll say drop document query selector all. Listen for similar menus. Drop down menu. And then for each might come over here and make this a little wider. It's easier to read. Move this down a little. All right. So for each menu, we will go through and toggle that class list to hidden. Essentially, if we have one that's hidden already, we'll close them all and then open the current one. By doing this, remove hidden, and then else drop down menu, which is the parent element or the next child sibling, element sibling, sorry. So that's pretty confusing, I know, but it's essentially saying if there is any other menu open, we want to close it and then open the menu we're targeting. So we can see if that works. There we go. Now, if you see, the side effect of that is if I click out here, I can't quite close the menu. So we want to actually consider that. And the way to do that is to listen for the whole window and target that item specifically. So in our case, I'll go inside this loaded function and then come down and do a little bit more of JavaScript. We say clicking outside of an open drop-down menu closes it. This is where it gets trickier, in my opinion. So the stuff before kind of makes sense logically. You click on the thing, it opens the menu, closes the other ones. Great. But how do I, just do what I natively assume would close the menu is clicking off of it? We're used to that. So we'll say window in case, which is basically the whole browser viewport. Well, it lists for a click event instead of on the button directly. And we could pass in our event this time and say if the inverse of event target matches drop down toggle. Need to pass the class there. So if it's not in that menu, we're going to close the menu. So we could say, again, we'll do document query selector all drop down menu for each menu if menu contains event target menu dot class list add not ass add hidden. So this is a complicated part. So we're listening for their window event, and they need to spell it right. Add event listener, clicking through, we're getting the event on that. So that main event's going to come anywhere on the screen. And then from that event, we only want to not target it if it matches within the context of our drop-down toggle. And then within that same event bubble, when that's occurring, we're going to select all the menus, look for each menu, and then if that container doesn't contain a target, we'll go ahead and toggle that list, if that makes sense. So that menu. So in our case, if we do that again, and it looks like I have it should be contains. Apologies. Thinking of Tailwind for some reason. So I click that again. Now if I click off, it's doing what we've advised. Maybe not. Let's see. And I have a slight typo here, and I was wondering why I'm running into errors, and it's because when I click on that text, this is what I was talking about before. If you remember that pointer events none class, if I click like right at this edge, we get what we want, right? So silly me, Mr. Typo Extraordinaire, I need one more S on that class, and now it'll work no matter where we click. So don't forget that, because this is what I was talking about. It kind of runs you up a wall because of this tiny little thing with CSS and JavaScript conflicting. And in that specific case, it's annoying. So I'll leave you at that. The final component of this is considering the mobile menu. So what I want to do is transcend down to that view. If you notice, if you click on this menu, nothing happens at this point. We want to fix that. So I'll go back so it's easier to write. Continuing here, we'll say mobile menu toggle of some sort. And we'll go and say const mobile menu. Now, again, you could consider this a possible place to write something more reusable. And you see how I've repeated myself up here for this for each menu here. The same here. They could be improved. I'm just going to keep it very plain for now. But there's plenty of room to, optimize. So we'll say document query selector mobile menu button, which we need to add a class for, and then const mobile menu equals document query selector mobile menu. All right, so it gives us our selector. Then we could say mobile menu, button. Add event listener. Click for this. And then we can do the same anonymous function to open up and do some logic inside there. Hash rocket here. Okay, and that could just be mobile menu, class list, toggle, hidden. Okay, now this I don't think will work yet. I don't think we have mobile menu as a class name just quite yet. Let me double check. We've got navigation menu. I think we're going to call it that. And then what do we call the button here? I think I'm going to make that a button. So I missed that before. I'll add a button there to make it a little more usable. And we'll just give it a class mobile menu button. Make that SVG wrapped with that. And then I could tidy that up a little. Again, I like to be explicit, so I'll say type button. And check our spelling. Great. So if I go and refresh that page, come down here, we've got our menu. Look, it toggles. Awesome. Now, you could go one step further and make this maybe full width or something, do something more, not absolute with the mobile menu. If you wanted to do something of that nature, that's pretty simple to do. You would remove that absolute structure. You could actually remove the class and the chevron too if you just want it to be all one list and it's just kind of like indented maybe. Up to you. Saving space is always a good idea, but also dropdowns can be the enemy sometimes if the design is a little too advanced. So hopefully that was useful. This is kind of my approach to a responsive generic navigation with Tailwind CSS. We approached a lot of common issues, I feel like, when you see something in the live world with a navbar structure, making it work on mobile screens, making those interactions function and it not be a complete mess. So I invite you to kind of extend this. You could add a search bar, some sort of form maybe a login icon or avatar with another dropdown over here. Reuse this JavaScript for it, and you could be good to go. So I hope this was useful. If you want to see more content like this, more videos that are kind of bare bones tax, Tailwind stuff, JavaScript stuff, let me know. I'd love to create these. I love to create anything really on this channel. So let me know in the comments, and I appreciate you watching. All right, until next time, so long.